know that most of what you've seen, read, or heard about Billy the Kid is untrue? My name is Gail Cooper. I'm a medical doctor and forensic psychiatrist. My specialty is murder case consultation for the defense. For 20 years, I've used my expertise to uncover the real Billy the Kid. Researching over 40,000 pages of archival documents and books, I've written the revisionist history. It's shocking, it's liberating, and I've written books demolishing the hoaxes, hijacking the history. My talks will share with you what I've found. Cover-ups, misinformation, and fakery, to use Old West lingo, will bite the dust. This talk debunks W.C. Jameson's and Frederick Bean's fake death scene for imposter Brushy Bill Roberts in their 1998 book, The Return of the Outlaw, Billy the Kid. The information is from my book, Cracking the Billy the Kid Imposter Hoax of Brushy Bill Roberts. In their 1998 book, The Return of the Outlaw, Billy the Kid, Brushy Bill believers W.C. Jameson and Frederick Bean tried to enhance the original Fort Sumner death scene as presented by Brushy Bill Roberts in his 1955 hoax book, Alias Billy the Kid. That book was created by Brushy's promoters, car parts salesman and attorney impersonator William V. Morrison, and the book's author, English teacher, and wannabe historian, C.L. Sonneshan. To Jameson and Bean, Brushy's Fort Sumner death scene is the holy grail, so their faith in his words made them present him in the raw, except for fixed-up grammar, from his taped interviews with Morrison. His words would not be seen again as Jameson wised up and fixed up in his 21st century Brushy backing books. But for The Return of the Outlaw, Billy the Kid, Jameson's and Bean's duped mindset was to present death scene events from Pat Garrett's and John W. Poe's books juxtaposed with Brushy's totally different version to prove that Garrett and Poe had lied. The death scene appears in 3 chapters. William Henry Roberts' story, Part 1, 1859 to 1881. William Henry Roberts' story, Part 2, 1881 to 1950. And Key and S, a re-examination of the shooting in Fort Sumner. In William Henry Roberts' story, Part 1, 1859 to 1881's shooting in Fort Sumner, the brief death scene just repeats Alias Billy the Kid's fiction with a few fix-up attempts. See Talk 66 linked below for debunking that original death scene. So Brushy and pal Billy Barlow go to a dance, return to Fort Sumner with 2 women, with one now named Celsa Gutierrez, Brushy's fictional girlfriend. All go to Jesus Silva's house, where he tells them Garrett is in town, and the women leave. Silva starts to cook, but has no meat. Jameson and Bean retain Sonneshan's original, fatal prompt error of Peter Maxwell's bedroom being at the back of the house with the side of beef hanging beside it. So, Silva says there is, quote, a side of beef hanging near Maxwell's bedroom. Barlow, now fixed up with stockinged feet to match real Billy, goes to get meat. Pistol shots are heard. Brushy rushes out to, quote, Maxwell's backyard to fire pistols at shadows moving near the house. Brushy is, quote, easily seen in the moonlit yard, as lifted from alias Billy the Kid, and is shot at by, quote, the lawmen. He enters a Mexican woman's house, and Celso Gutierrez appears to say the sheriff and his men killed Billy Barlow and were passing the body off as the Kid's. The chapter, Q&S, a reexamination of the shooting in Fort Sumner, ridiculously uses Brushy to contradict Garrett's quotes in his 1882 book, The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid, and Poe's quotes in his 1933 book, The Death of Billy the Kid. Poe states that he and McKinney stayed outside while Garrett, quote, entered the Maxwell's room through the open door. Brushy states he didn't go because, quote, I had this crazy feeling that Barlow hadn't ought to go. There might be some trouble out there. Garrett, sitting beside Maxwell's pillow, is told Billy might have left town. Poe says that about 30 seconds after Garrett entered, a youth approached whom he thought was a guest. The youth pointed his revolver, asking Q&S, and backed into the door after Poe tried to reassure him. Garrett says the youth entered, holding a butcher knife and revolver, came close to the bed, asking Maxwell Q&S. Garrett fires 2 shots, the first killing Billy. Poe states that he heard the youth ask Maxwell who the men were outside, then what sounded like 3 shots, then gasps of someone dying. Brushy had no bedroom scene. He hears a shot and says, I pulled one of my 44s and ran through the door, trying to see in the dark. 2 more shots came from the shadow beside the Maxwell house. I couldn't find a target to shoot at. It was too dark to see. Note Brushy's fatal, dark, moonless night era, left in by unaware Jameson and Bean. Garrett says Maxwell ran out of the bedroom, telling Poe and McKinney not to shoot him. Poe says he told Garrett that the kid wouldn't come there, and he shot the wrong man. Brushy, sticking to his back porch prompt, says, I ran toward Maxwell's back porch. From the corner of my eye, I saw a body lying on the back porch. I knew it had to be Barlow. My partner had walked right into a trap. The trap had likely been set for me. Brushy runs to a backyard fence, is wounded by gunshots, shoots back, jumps a fence, lands in an alley, enters a shack's opening door because, quote, all the shooting woke everybody up, and a Mexican woman pulls him inside. This fiction suffered from Brushy's and backers' ignorance of Fort Sumner's layout around the parade ground, and Brushy's fake gun battle was historically heard by no one. Garrett tells his companions that he's sure he shot Billy. They examine the body, see the wound above the heart, and examine his .41 caliber self-cocker. Poe says Maxwell got a candle and put it on the outside of the window so they could look inside, and they saw a man on the floor. When they were inside the room, Billy is identified. Brushy, not being the victim, as Billy, says he blacked out in the presence of the helping women. Poe says native women then asked for the body and took it to a carpenter's shop for a wake. Poe says he, Garrett, and McKinney stayed inside Maxwell's house for the night for fear of being attacked by Billy's friends. Brushy says when he came to, Celso, quote, another of Sabal's sisters who had been a sweetheart of mine was there. Seltzer says the attackers stayed in the house because, quote, they are afraid to come out in the dark. They think some of your friends will shoot them. To be noted is that Jameson and Bean left in the carpenter's shop wake, not noticing that it added up to 200 additional identifications of Billy's body, unlike K.G. Sonneshin, who kept it out of alias Billy the Kid. And Jameson and Bean left in posed fear of violence, which confirmed townspeople's rage because they were sure Billy had been killed. They also left in Brushy's fatal name-dropping error that Sabal and Celso Gutierrez were siblings when they were a married couple, and they left in Brushy's fatal Dark Knight error with Celso claiming the lawmen's fear to come out in the dark. A Jameson and Bean fix-up uses the faked Celso character to narrate the mistaken identity killing by pretending Brushy quoted her. She says, Pat is telling everyone you are dead. They took the body of your friend inside the house, and they say it is yours. Some men from the town have already been sent to dig a grave by lantern light. Your partner looks very much like you in the dark, except for his beard. Pat says they will bury the body in the morning. If the coffin is closed, who will guess that you are not inside it? This fix-up transferred Barlow's body inside the house to match Billy's body's historical scene, and added was a beard to Barlow to match a non-historical corpse identification used later in their book. In reality, Celso wouldn't know this insider information. And in Alias Billy the Kid, Brushy only used her to give the basic hoax. He said, Celso came running in and said they had killed Barlow and they were passing off his body as mine. Another fix-up put Sonneshin's reward collection conspiracy in Brushy's mouth. So he says, Garrett realized his mistake in shooting Barlow and was making a try at collecting the reward that was out on me. In Alias Billy the Kid, he just says, I pushed my 44s into the scabbards and rode out of town with Lobato. As discussed in Talk 67 linked below, Jameson and Bean were too historically ignorant to protect Brushy from his fatal moon error of making July 14, 1881's night dark. In reality, the near full moon hovering huge at the horizon made it almost as light as day. So Jameson and Bean inadvertently reveal that Morrison and Sonneshin had fixed up Brushy's error by their fake chapter title, Death by Moonlight, with his forged quotes to match. As mentioned, for their chapter William Henry Roberts' Story Part 1, 1859 to 1881, Jameson and Bean had first innocently lifted Alias Billy the Kid's fakery, which said, Billy, meaning Brushy, easily seen in the moonlit yard, immediately drew return fire from the lawmen. But for their own chapter, K&S, a re-examination of the shooting in Fort Sumner, Brushy actually says July 14th, 1881's night was dark. His tale's logic was that a dark night caused Barlow to be mistaken for him as Billy the Kid. My thanks go to Jameson and Bean for giving me that hoax-busting treasure. So, Real Brushy says, After hearing the shot from Pete Maxwell's place, I pulled one of my 44s and ran through the door trying to see in the dark. 2 more shots came from the shadow beside the Maxwell house. I couldn't find a target. It was too dark to see. Brushy had his Seltzer character say his attackers were, quote, inside the Maxwell house. They're afraid to come out in the dark. And he used darkness to explain Barlow's killing. Garrett knew by now he'd killed the wrong man in the dark. So Brushy had Seltzer say, they say the body is yours. Your partner looks very much like you in the dark. Obviously, Brushy's Dark Night era proved he wasn't in Fort Sumner that night, as well as proving Sonishin's and Morrison's forgery of Bright Moonlight for their hoax. That Dark Night era was a gift that kept on giving. Though Bean passed away, Jameson, for his 21st century Brushy backing books, faked Bright Moonlight too, proving his descent to hoaxer. Jameson and Bean also pretended to analyze the death scene in chapter K&S, a re-examination of the shooting in Fort Sumner. But it's just misinformation and concealment. They make up that the death scene's only witnesses were Pat Garrett and Pete Maxwell. They add, quote, Maxwell contributed very little relative to describing what actually took place in the room. This is lying. They hid Maxwell's eyewitness coroner's jury report statement. I, being in my bed, in my room, at about midnight on the 14th day of July, Pat F. Garrett came into my room and sat down. William Bonney came in and got close to my bed with a gun in his hand and asked me, who is it? And then Pat F. Garrett fired 2 shots at the said William Bonney, and the said William Bonney fell near my fireplace, and I went out of the room. And when I came in again about 3 or 4 minutes after the shots, the said William Bonney was dead. They also hid deputies Poe and McKinney as witnesses and forgot that up to 200 townspeople also identified Billy's body at their nighttime carpenter shop wake. Jameson and Bean finish up with 13 fake discrepancies in Garrett's and Poe's accounts as so-called proof that Billy was never shot. Though their fictions are silly, their manufacturing of discrepancies became a cornerstone for fakery in the massive, Brushy backing Billy the Kid case hoax, which followed in 5 years. Here are Jameson's and Bean's so-called discrepancies. 1. Garrett describes seeing a figure in the orchard, which he later realizes was Billy. Poe does not. That simply means that Poe left out the insignificant incident. 2. Garrett heard Billy speak in the peach orchard and heard him speak in the room, so this was a contradiction about voices. In reality, Garrett wrote that he couldn't make out the distant voices in the orchard and didn't know then that it was Billy. 3. Garrett claimed a man sprang to the door. Poe said they backed in, so no one entered the room. In reality, it was a matter of perspective, because part of the wall blocked Poe's vision of the door, so he couldn't see the final entry into the room. 4. Garrett didn't recognize Billy in the dark room, but Maxwell did. In reality, Garrett hesitated just a few seconds before Billy's voice convinced him, and he shot him dead. 5. Garrett heard Billy was in Fort Sumner in a letter from a local rancher, but Poe said Garrett did not believe Billy was around. In reality, that simply meant that Garrett doubted that Billy would have come to such a risky place. 6. Poe doubted killing of the right man. In reality, that was Poe's first reaction since he didn't know Billy. He was then immediately convinced by Garrett, Maxwell, and townspeople that Billy was the victim. 7. Poe said that through the lit bedroom window he saw the body on its back, but Miguel Otero's book, The Real Billy the Kid, had Jesus Silva say the body was face down. In reality, Otero, with no connection to the event, wrote fiction and published his book in 1936, 55 years after the killing. Also, with Billy shot from the front, he would be thrust backwards, landing supine. But during examining of his body, it could have been turned over to check for an exit wound. The Jesus Silva story came from an Alias Billy the Kid prompt footnote, a July 1936 Frontier Times interview by a Leslie Traylor of Galveston, Texas, titled Facts Regarding the Escape of Billy the Kid. Traylor interviewed old-timers in Lincoln and Fort Sumner in 1933 and 1935, including Jesus Silva. Traylor wrote, Silva said he was at home when he heard the shot and they sent for him, that when he arrived they were afraid to go into the room, and as he knew the kid well and was not afraid, he went in with a light and found him dead, lying face downward with a pistol in one hand and a butcher's knife in the other. So the real issue was not face up or face down in Silva's self-aggrandizing tale, but that he was yet another witness confirming that the corpse was Billy Bonney's. 8. Poe said the body was taken to the carpenter shop, but Charles Frederick Rudolph said the coroner's jury met the next morning with the body still on the floor. This is a lie. Charles Frederick Rudolph, son of coroner's jury President Milner Rudolph, in his 1980 book, Los Bolitos, The Story of Billy the Kid and His Gang, merely stated, the jurymen met over the kid's body and, with no argument or dissent, unanimously agreed on the following coroner's jury report given below. That meant that after the carpenter's shop wake, in the night of July 14th to 15th, the body was returned to the Maxwell's house for the inquest. Charles Frederick Rudolph gave no location in the house, but he did confirm the body was Billy's. 9. Garrett and Poe said Billy had a .41 caliber pistol when he used .44s. This repeats a Morrison scam not used in Alias Billy the Kid. The answer is that a double-action Colt .41 Thunderer is a smaller six-chambered hideaway gun which could be used in addition to a larger holstered single-action Colt .44. And Billy wasn't wearing a gun belt for a Colt .44 because of feeling safe in the town. 10. If the man said Q&S, how could he be Billy Barlow? Jameson and Bean answered their own question by saying that Barlow was half Mexican. They apparently got this fiction from Sonishim, who had recommended a dime novel-style July 23, 1881 article by Singleton M. Ashenfelter in his Grant County Herald titled Exit the Kid. Sonishim misled them, or they misread the article. Ashenfelter merely made up that Billy's body was in a Mexican disguise, not that he was Mexican, so that didn't make Barlow, as the fictional victim, Mexican either. Ashenfelter also made up that the body was bearded, which Jameson and Bean also lifted for a corpse description discrepancy, proving the body wasn't Billy's, while missing that it demolished Brushy's claim that Barlow had been mistaken for him as fair and clean-shaven. 11. If Billy was Anglo, why would he speak to Maxwell in Spanish? In reality, it was his disguise with strangers outside, and he and Peter Maxwell were both bilingual anyway. 12. Why was Billy asking questions instead of shooting? In reality, he didn't know that he was being ambushed. 13. Cited is Sonishin's April 15, 1944 interview quoting Jack Fountain about the back porch shooting as footnoted in Alias Billy the Kid. That caused the historical bedroom location to be a discrepancy for dupe Jameson and Bean. In reality, Jack Fountain, with no first-hand knowledge, spouted old-timer malarkey about the side of beef hanging beside Maxwell's door. And Sonishin made up that both were at the house's back. That prompting caused Brushy to make up Billy Barlow's shooting at the back porch beside the beef. In reality, Maxwell's bedroom was at the house's southeast corner, and the beef hung on the opposite side of the house at its north porch. The next talk debunks the return of the outlaw Billy the Kid's faked evidence for Brushy as Billy the Kid.